Hi, Steve. I'm glad
Hi.
that we meet with Zahir today.
Me too.
Glad to be here.
Thank you.
We're talking about the Donbass region and their struggle for self-determination there previously, Steve, I think. This is appreciated by those of us who are not enchanted by the corporate media and their pro-NATO position, basically. I think there's various ways in which Ukraine was already working with NATO as a de facto satellite of the NATO war alliance. And, especially now with the funding of the neo-Nazi groups, it's turned into an urgent situation. I'm glad that the Lugansk People's Autonomous Republic is now entirely liberated. The Donetsk People's Autonomous Republic is about half liberated. But I think the Russian troops are coming in from behind, to take care of the neo-Nazis there who are using the civilians as a human shield.
Well, I want to share something to our listeners and viewers that maybe we don't think about, and just to put something in some context. Us in the United States, and us in the United States, we are used to battles such as sit-ins, picket lines, demonstrations, boycotts, maybe taking over a freeway, maybe Molotov cocktail, something on a very limited basis, as far as how to fight back and do community self-defense. I don't think we have a good sense, not because we're not intelligent, but just things are changing in the world. And now we're seeing fights where countries are getting involved in large-scale politics through warfare. And I think we have to expand our view on what politics really is and what warfare means and what role the United States always plays in any conflict. It is never progressive. It is never revolutionary. It is always counter-revolutionary. It is always evil. So if the United States essentially is saying that people in the United States have to have higher gas prices and higher food prices and higher everything to help Ukraine, clearly the United States is defending evil, or it's evil. There's never a case where the United States is correct. And when it comes to warfare, it's terrible to see people who are dying on all sides. And I do mean that. Soldiers as well as civilians. However, war involves people dying, and it's not pretty. I've seen a lot of things in media from people on the front lines you don't see on NBC and CBS that really shows the tragedy of how civilians are caught up in this situation because the Ukrainian military and government is dominated by fascists, and how they want a racial war, ethnic war against the Russian population. And it's not pretty, it's never nice, it's nothing to be joyful about. However, politics does operate that way. And that's just, I think we have to learn from this situation. At least there's a lot of things that we can learn.
Yeah, I mean, that reminds me of two Malcolm quotes, revolution is bloody. And if you knew what revolution was, you wouldn't even use it in your vocabulary. And then number two, Malcolm was talking about, how the media, don't let the media tell you who your enemies are. I think this is a very important thing that we have to get back to, is going back to that real study and try to connect with organizations on the ground. And try to connect with different people, because when we look at the media, we know that they're all pushing a particular pro-Western agenda. There is no objectivity. We should just assume that off basis and always try to get our own independent. Sometimes there won't be a media source that will even show the complexity of some of these issues. And so it's going to be up to us to plug into the correct sources and try to formulate these opinions and do our own blog websites, You know, we got to start getting back into getting our own writing and putting that out there. And it's easier now because we got YouTube and all these different social medias, but I'm seeing a lack of organization positions, you know, on these type of things. Like, hey, we see this and we break it down on this level. So I think that that's something we got to get back to.
You know, when I first wrote the article on the Donbass national liberation struggles there, which at first, you know, were willing to remain as autonomous republics, you know, within the Ukrainian Federation, but then the Federation was turned into the typical nation state, you know, much like what Zionism does, and excludes, you know, anybody else, you know, who is not a member of the principal nation. So then it struck me that the same thing applies to the United States of America. You know, you have the Black Belt there, which is divided into little chunks, you know, of other states, so that the Black nation, you know, residents are not represented any more than like 30% in each of these states. So they never have a majority anywhere. It's like a scheme, you know, to divide out and conquer, you know, the indigenous population of the Black nation. So if you look at the other maps that I included in the article that I wrote that show the population density, the demographics, you know, of each, you know, nationality, well, then you see, you know, like the strength and the power of what of the Black Belt, you know, what it is. And Atlanta, Georgia, you know, seems to be like the capital of this Black Belt. So, you know, I started to apply the same criteria that, you know, I learned from the Jewish Bundist milieu that I come from, of, you know, nationalities seeking their self-determination by national cultural autonomy or, you know, national cultural territorial autonomy. And this would apply to the Black Belt. You know, that's like should be an autonomous republic within the North American Federation. And then, you know, there could be majority control of the Black nation over itself, internal self-determination and democracy. Otherwise, you know, there is no democracy for a national minority. You know, that, you know, Jewish people know that, and I think Black people know that as well.
I was going to say too, that's important to conceptualize this in that way, like Black nation, because like what you said, you see how it's cut up and they take away like some of that voting power. And so like we have to think about it in that kind of revolutionary sense, because then we could see why gerrymandering, when they cut up these votes, how it takes away Black votes, how that could undermine self-determination for Black people. But then, you know, somebody else could co-opt that and say, you know, well, you got to get better voting power for, you know, keeping up the American nation state. You know, it could be co-opted to this type of reformist strategy. But but if we got to understand it in terms of Black self-determination, I think that that's important, because it allows us to then say, what do we need? It gives us better strategies to how we need to go about it, instead of just saying, you know, we're not going to participate in this or that. We could say, this is why we're going to do this, you know?
Yeah, strategic approach, long-term. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. I think Steve agrees, but maybe he's, you know, stepped out of the room for the moment. But it's one of the first things that impressed me in terms of implicating myself in the struggle in the 60s, you know, when I was a teenager. And, you know, I heard, somehow I heard, you know, there was going to be a SNCC meeting, you know, downtown at a bar, you know, so I went looking for it, but never found it. So, but, you know, Vietnam took over, you know, the political space, you know, as well. In Canada, you know, we had to sort of organize the massive demonstrations for that. And it was funny, you know, because we had two demonstrations happening at the same time. Because, you know, we had the CP-led demonstration, you know, for peace in Southeast Asia. And then we had the anti-war, you know, demonstration that we were organizing. I was in the Trotskyist movement at the time, because they're the only ones who would accept, you know, a Jewish Bundist like me. They ignored what I was doing, you know, like in terms of politics, you know, being anti-Zionist, you know, but they didn't try to stop me from doing it. So we organized another demonstration. So there was these two demonstrations of 20,000 people coming together. And at that point, you know, then I think it was Nixon actually who ended the draft in order to try to calm things down. And then that was the beginning of the end for the US intervention in Vietnam.
Yeah, you know, I was just thinking about this. Like, I was in the oppressor's army for a little bit before I liberated myself, you know. And I remember when 9/11 happened, and like everything shifted towards that, you know. And it's like war and patriotism often supersedes this revolutionary consciousness a lot of times. And you would think sometimes like people should know, but this is why like having this anti-war stance is important, and like having that type of consciousness, because you know, even with this Russia-Ukraine thing, you know, I've seen this provoke some kind of patriotism in people that I wouldn't have thought otherwise. But then, you know, they take like this it'll be like an anti-Russian stance, but it's not an anti-imperialist. It's an anti, you know, kind of leftover US propaganda against the Soviet Union, you know. And I think that that's what's really causing a lot of this confusion over this subject. You know, and I always try to take the anti-war stance just in general, because I understood it to be kind of like a imperialism, you know. But and yeah, I mean, it's I just get confused sometimes, because I know people will have these kind of ideas about, you know, what we need to do, but then it just gets totally zapped away when war is on the horizon.
Incredible. Yeah. Transformation of people. I was on an academic, you know, like a webinar, you know, like discussing about, you know, retired professors and everything, you know, with white hair like me. Only I didn't get to teach because I was boycotted, you know. So, you know, these people, you know, like, you know, I started off, you know, with my sort of position on the Donetsk liberation movements, and they had no idea what I was talking about. And these are supposed to be, you know, like the intelligentsia of Canada, you know, the cream of the crop, you know, the most educated, most aware people. They had no idea, you know, like what I was talking about. They were just, you know, just missing, you know, everything I said, you know, because you know, I got some information from Russia Today. And, you know, all of a sudden I realized, you know, that I was speaking to a bunch of white supremacists, and these were supposed to be colleagues, you know, but I looked at them, you know, like, and they had no comprehension, you know, that minorities, you know, had any rights at all. It was all a matter of the sovereignty of the Ukrainian independent, you know, republic and their frontiers. And they always define a nation by frontiers and not by people. So, you know, everything sort of, you know, slipped away there. I couldn't go back, you know, to that session again with those people. It's something, you know, we call them the rad libs, you know, radical liberals.
Yeah.
So they sound good, you know, until something, you know, serious comes up, and then all of a sudden, you know, they flip. So there's got to be a realignment, you know, what the left is, what the serious revolutionary movement is. We're putting together convergence, you know.
I agree. It's going to be some realignment, because now it's very clear. It's very clear that some people we thought were our allies are not our allies. That we thought could be strategic allies are just tactical allies at best. And when it comes to war, when it comes to the international situation, they don't know what they're talking about. And their view is not based on what you talked about, Abraham. Self-determination is not based on autonomy. It's based on the sovereignty of borders. And that's nonsense, because this country was based on no borders when nobody got here. There's borders of the indigenous population. Their borders were violated. The whole Western Hemisphere, the borders were violated. So historically, to talk about borders and sovereignty is to deny the imperialist conquest of Africa and of Asia and of the you know, Western Hemisphere. So I think that, you know, these are difficult conversations, but they have to be put out there to put things in a correct historical perspective. Because we don't have a historical perspective, you just get caught up in theory and politics, and that's what this situation here shows us. You gotta have historical perspective. So when Black people talk about racism, that's a historical perspective. And we can't just talk about economics. We always have to make sure that racism is part of the analysis, because that's how everything started, with the economics and racism. And we don't bring those together historically, You can have all the great king celebrations you want. You can celebrate Cinco de Mayo. You can celebrate Chavez's birthday. You can celebrate you can put $20 bills with Fanlou Hammer on it. Forget about Sojourner and Truth. Forget about everybody. I mean, you can put Fanlou Hammer on $20 bills. The same. The reality is still the same. So historical perspective is very important. And this question about the Ukraine and about what's happening in Donbass, that is not allowed to be talked about in the U.S. media. If anybody talks about that, like on my channel, they just take the video off. You can't put it, strike, that kind of thing. So yeah, I agree.
I heard something that I find incredible, that Germany has banned the letter Z because that's what the Russian army is using to designate, this operation by putting on their tanks.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
Well,
wow.
This is really exposing the Russophobia. It's incredible, how this capitalist, societies can invent different forms of racism. They just invented it, just like made up, and as long as everybody says the same thing, and everybody, agrees to lie and know that they're lying, but they don't care, like the Zionists do. It's incredible how this, human sort of, psychology operates, it's so self-defeating that people, choose to adopt, to become an enemy rather than have an enemy in the first place. Create enemies by the use of Zionism and racism and all those ideologies. It just amazes me incredibly. I can't get over it, and it's part of my trauma, from being a refugee kid, of Holocaust survivors who escaped, fortunately, as refugees themselves into the Soviet Union, which saved, 500,000 East European Jewish refugees. But, this Ukrainian neo-Nazi, avant-garde, of what they call Ukrainian nationalism, very dangerous. And I can appreciate, why Russia has taken it so seriously that they've had to intervene militarily. And their campaign for denazification, is something that I think the Russian public is supporting as well, because they know the threat. They've experienced it. They don't want to experience it again. And so they don't really want the war to end until the problem of the Nazis is taken care of. Any of the soldiers, in the Ukrainian military attacking, are, infiltrated, by the neo-Nazis there. The main Ukrainian army of 100,000 is sitting on the Elbe River, I think it's called, just to prevent Russia from going into the central interior of the Ukraine. But they're not engaged in the assault and the invasion of the Donetsk and Lugansk republics there. So if those invading, aggressive forces are taken care of, by the Russian military, then I think that they should be appreciated for having done so in the first place.
They took off that entire RT channel. They just ripped it off of YouTube. I remember I used to watch Chris Hedges' show on Contact, and it's all completely gone. Yeah. So that free speech context it's get thrown out the window, and it should tell us it's controlled media. Yeah. It's like we're gonna tell you what you can know, and we're gonna pretend like this is a opposite opinion, but it's all accepted opposition.
Now it's officially banned in England. England, the seat of democracy. Yes. Oh yes. Oh. Yeah. I'm still getting it here in Canada, although from time to time it gets cut off. But England and Europe, what are they fighting for? The free world? They call themselves a free world.
Yeah. Yeah, they invade Iraq to put democracy there, but yeah.
Libya is such a tragedy as well. I was working closely with Libya. I was there many times, and they were very serious about, their own revolution and world revolution even, but, they didn't, they thought that they had completed the revolution when they were just beginning it. And so they failed to secure the support of the eastern half of the country, and that was used to undermine them. And then they have a civil war still ongoing there that's cooled down, but if the son of Gaddafi, becomes the presidential candidate again, the polls indicate that he would be the most popular choice for president of a republic there. So perhaps he could bring back the Jamaria and find a way to reconcile with the Benghazi center in the eastern part of the country. So that's something to look forward to. But Yemen, they took care of that war already. The Yemen revolutionaries, with their drones that attacked the refineries inside Saudi Arabia. Wow, that's what made them back down and agree to a ceasefire now for 2 months. Because there's like world oil crisis now. They've painted themselves into a corner, and now they're cutting their own throats by sanctioning Russia. It's going to be incredible.
I think too, it's like like I was saying, I wanted to ask a question for you guys. How do you guys feel about Gaddafi? Because me, I have a Pan-African background. I voted with like AAPRP, and Gaddafi is kind of held up as a hero. But then there's another side, that would kind of say he's kind of like a dictator. I've kind of always learned that there's balance, but I also think it's somewhat your perspective. But it's almost like if you say something negative about Gaddafi, you're feeding into the American propaganda, but then you don't want to not critique the things that need to be critiqued.
Yeah, there was the same problem with the Trotskyists, who were accused of being traitors and imperialist agents, because they criticized Stalinism. But the problem is that it gets complicated, because one of the factions of the Trotskyists that broke off, Schachtman faction, some of them turned into, apologists for U.S. imperialism, and they started to turn into neocons from the original Trotskyist movement. So it's, it certainly has a sort of a tendency to it, but it wasn't the actual position of what Trotskyism, put together as a critique of Stalinism. It was a revolutionary critique, not a reactionary critique. Same thing goes, in what you were saying. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that you asked about Gaddafi. My view on that brother is evolving, but what I can say now about Muammar Gaddafi is that the West feared him. They feared his movement in Africa, and he's dead now.
Yeah. And
that's why he's dead.
Yeah.
The use of the NATO war, NATO, remember NATO, to attack Libya, to destabilize it, to bring back slavery into Libya, had to be done with the death of Gaddafi. He could not be allowed to live in any way. And this is what they do to leaders, that they don't have to be vanguard revolutionaries per se. But if their view on how to organize their country and the region differs greatly with that of the West, they certainly will face destabilization and possibly death. And I think I'm just putting it straight. Gaddafi shows us the importance of not. I'm not saying he made mistakes negotiating with the West. However, once they know you're weak militarily, they'll come after you militarily. That's what they do. Russia, a few days ago, fired a weapon into a supply depot in Ukraine. It had never been used before in war. It was a signal to the West. We have weapons that you don't know how to track. You have to do that. Again, we're not talking about how we fight on the streets and how we fight politically. It's a whole different kind of fight when it comes to war and negotiations and that kind of stuff. It's a whole different minefield, and we don't have, as people in this country, our struggles, the way we've carried out hasn't been based on missiles and that kind of, no, it hasn't. So we kind of don't, we're not into like studying that more. I think we need to study that more, how war actually is carried out. But Gaddafi was a great man. He's dead because he's dead because he's a great man. And I think we should learn from anything we can from our leaders who have been taken out because of U.S. imperialism. And that's why Gaddafi isn't with us anymore, because of NATO and the US. And it's very, very tragic.
Yeah, very true. We have a few minutes left on the 40-minute deadline, imposed by Zoom. So Zahir, if you'd like to make some concluding remarks, and then we'll have our video together.
I think for me, the biggest thing that we mentioned is realignment, right? A realignment of the left and to these movements. There has to be, I remember reading the New African Theoretical Journals, and they talk about rebuild, and build to win. And I almost feel like at this point in time, we may have to focus on setting a new foundation, and even for another generation to come. But I feel like it's been like somebody dropped a bomb on everything, and we're just we're scattered, still trying to figure ourselves out. So I think realignment is key. And also, we do a political education class, Community Movement Builders, twice a month. And I would like to invite you guys over to one of our classes whenever you guys have the time.
Thank you. And as far as I'm concerned, I think one thing I learned from this conversation is the importance of using the internet and conversations to make connections, to find out what other comrades and people in the struggle are doing around the country, and to build connections with them and find things we can unite around and get busy doing the work that we need to do. So thank you very much.